nació en Barinas, iluminando al Orinoco, y fue creciendo poco a poco, desde Bolívar al continente, esa luz irreverente que hoy se integra tersa y plena con la historia de los héroes de la nueva sociedad.
So welcome everyone, and thank you for coming. My name is Ben, and I work at Octopus Books. You know, the books we've carried for 40 years deal with the social, environmental, economic struggles that are going on in our society, and with this space we try to organize events so we can actually in person have discussions and debates about these various struggles. And lastly, before I pass it to Arnold, I think he'll talk about all of the sponsors. We've got great sponsors today, but in particular, I think the Embassy of Venezuela set up this whole thing. When they said they'd handle food, I was thinking like chips. You know? So thank you. We'll start with Tito Medina is going to sing a song. Tito's a local singer-songwriter, social justice activist, and is involved with Consensus Media, Consensus Multimedia, which does the sound here and in a variety of events throughout the communities.
Maybe I want to translate part of this. His life was born in Barinas. Tu luz nació en Barinas, iluminando al Orinoco, y fue creciendo poco a poco, desde Bolívar al continente, esa luz irreverente que hoy se integra tersa y plena con la historia de los héroes de la nueva sociedad. Chávez vive, la lucha sigue.
Thank you very much. My name is Arnold August, and I have the pleasure to announce the next person who's going to address you today. And this is Stephen Barani. He is Associate Professor, Graduate Studies Coordinator, the School of International Development and Global Studies, University of Ottawa.
Let me go, as the Cubans would say, directo al grano, since I only have 5 minutes. Here are 3 good reasons why you should buy, why you should read, and why we should debate this book here tonight and far beyond. First, this book contributes to the revival of debates on democracy and on processes of democratization in the Americas and beyond, by helping us look beyond US-centric conceptions of democracy as competitive, multi-party, electoral democracy based on private property. It helps us look at different and appreciate different forms of democracy that have and are still being built in Cuba and in other countries of the Bolivarian Alliance of the Americas. It helps us appreciate the vibrant debates in those societies on how, for example, to balance the need for unitary state power, which is essential for the defense of sovereignty, particularly against aggression 100 kilometers away from your borders, but also how to balance that imperative with representative politics and direct participatory democracy at the national and local levels. It helps us understand debates on how to articulate democratic governance with the promotion of citizens' substantive rights to jobs, to healthcare, to education, In a word, it helps us appreciate debates on what you could call the difficult social construction of democracy, or as the author so nicely puts it, democracy in motion. However, for me, the book's greatest contributions is not just at the conceptual or strategic level. It's really about Cuba in many ways, and it's this detailed examination of political institutions, political culture, and political struggles for democracy in Cuba that really sets this book aside from anything else I've seen in the past 20 or so years. The historical background on the emergence and deformation of democracy in the late colonial periods, the late 1800s, and then later under U.S. tutelage in the early 20th century, as well as on the evolution of political institutions in Cuba during different phases of the revolution, are useful historical reminders, essential background reading for those who might not know it. The most original parts of the book, however, to me, are the 3 chapters on the recent history of Cuban politics, including the Cuban Communist Party Congress and the conference in 2011-2012, very fresh, the electoral system as it's working now, not just at the national level, but also at the municipal level, with great vignettes, illustrations, interviews with local activists, local CDR activists, local elected deputies, nationally elected deputies, and so on and so forth along the way. Beautiful illustrations of the human face of democratic politics in Cuba. When I lived in Cuba and a few years ago, and now as a professor who actually teaches on development and democracy in the Caribbean, I often longed for a book that actually explained in detailed and fairly objectively how Cuba's political system actually works. Beyond the rhetoric that it's a democracy or not. What are the institutions? How do they work? How do people get elected? Who do they represent? To whom are they accountable? How are they accountable or not? What are the debates on all of this within Cuba in different parts of the state and the society? So thank you, Arnold, for actually producing that text. We now have a text that does just that. Not the last text, but hopefully the first text, based on 6 years of painstaking archival research, key informant interviews, and participant observation. I really commend you for your skillful use of historical data, quantitative data, and ethnographic data along the way to buttress your very nuanced arguments about the logic and the constantly evolving, constantly contested nature of Cuba's political institutions. Thank you very much.
This discussion is on the issue of democracy in the Americas after Chavez. I was invited to Caracas only 1 or 2 weeks after the death of Hugo Chavez and 1 or 2 weeks before the April 14th elections. I was one of the 100 intellectuals from all over the world, literally, who were invited to Caracas at that time in order to discuss the legacy of Hugo Chavez. And I'd like to give this as a short introduction to the issue of democracy in Venezuela. And then the next day, I had a chance to go to the St. January 23rd parish here to see the campaign headquarters for the elections that were about to take place 2 weeks later. And these are one of the main posters that we find in the election headquarters. And this is all the different maps which are used to organize the elections. And this is one of the leaders of the Socialist Party in Venezuela having a training session with people who are going to work on the elections. And he is explaining that this is a training session that people are going to learn how to participate in the elections. And in this particular case, They are talking about how these people participate as witnesses at the elections to make sure that there's no fraud. It's exactly the same right that the opposition party had as well. In dealing with the question of democracy in Venezuela, I'd like to first deal with the question of democracy in the United States, how it operates. I fully investigated the whole history of the United States from the end of the 18th century to the present time, and specifically with regard to Obama, exactly how he came into power and what his role is. Now, with regards to democracy in Venezuela, I gave you an idea how it came about by the revolt, but first, and then the elections of Hugo Chavez, and then the funneling of money from petroleum into the missions, the opening up of a democratic revolutionary movement at the base. This is how democracy in Venezuela is developing, and as you know, the elections took place on April 14th, 2013. Everyone knows it was very close. But what did the White House say? Right from the beginning, the White House said that we do not have faith in the election results. They did not recognize the elections. And on the very same day that the White House said that, April 15, 2013, the opposition candidate Capriles and his close supporters organized provocations within Caracas and other places in Venezuela in which 11 Chavistas were assassinated. And I am convinced that their basic goal at that time, despite Obama's smiling face and the image of change that they have tried to project since 2008, the basic goal was to try to destabilize Venezuela on April 15th and create an incident, including a coup d'etat, to overthrow the elected government at that time. Now we have also Bolivia and Ecuador. Bolivia and Ecuador is a different situation there. The United States has contacts with, there's a lot of indigenous populations of Bolivia and Ecuador. They have contacts with, the United States has contacts with these indigenous people, some of them who openly work with the United States, and some of them have legitimate grievances. So Bolivia and Ecuador are in a very complicated situation trying to deal with this. But at the same time, like Venezuela, they have opened up the door for a new democracy with a new constitution in which it is clearly indicated that sovereignty lies in the hands of the people, and this is the type of democracy that they are trying to develop. The Cuban Revolution took place in 1959, a long time ago, but in 1959, for the first time in the history of Cuba, sovereignty was in the hands of the people. And in my book, I open up the pages of my book to many scholars, leaders, including Raul Castro, other people in the academic and non-academic field who are carrying out serious debate on how to improve the democracy in Cuba alongside with the changes that are taking place economically and socially. And so I just would like to close on this issue, and hopefully, I don't have any more time, but if in the question and answer period, if people have any question with regards to democracy in Cuba or any of the other countries, great, thank you.
Well, that's exactly the question I wanted to ask. So I will buy your book. Yeah, Cuban Democracy 101, I think that would be helpful, at least for me and maybe others.
You know, Cuban Democracy 101, as Stephen said, is in my book. So all I can say today is it's important that when people look at democracy in Cuba, and one does away with preconceived notions. For example, on the question of freedom of the press. Okay, normally people look at it from the point of view of the United States notion of freedom of the press. In the American Constitution, it says there is complete freedom of the press. There is no restriction at all. But in reality, freedom of the press, we know that we see it in the last few days, is completely restrained by the oligarchy who holds the main media in their hands. Just a second, in Cuba, the Constitution says that there is freedom of the press within the confines of socialism. So at least it's not hypocritical. That it says that people have freedom of the press in order to promote socialism and within that context. Now, I can tell you, now I've investigated very closely, at this time, more than ever before, journalists, scholars, and other people are very sharply debating the issue of the press, how to improve it.
Yeah, Arnold, can you just explain the role? I guess a trade unionist Canada with very little say in the way our government operates. In comparison with Cuba, how are the trade unions treated and how are they involved in democracy within Cuba?
Okay, that's a question that will also respond to hopefully part of your question, even with regards to Stephen's remarks earlier just a short while ago. When I investigated the situation of democracy in Cuba, how the political system, how the elections take place, I also investigated very carefully how the state functions between elections at all levels, the local grassroots level, including the national assembly. I took a case study, the Social Security Bill of Cuba in 2008.
I've been really impressed by the changes that have taken place in Latin America in the past 10 or so years. If you look back at what happened to Guatemala in the 50s, what happened in Chile in the 70s, and yet since that time, there have been enormous changes, governments moving to the left, more popular left governments. I'd like you to comment on what you see as the future of this after the death of Chavez, and what the prospects are for greater democracy and socialism in Latin America.
How do the people feel about the dual currency, the peso for the tourists versus the peso for the common people? And how does that relate in society?
Yeah, I want to get back to the heart of your book, Participatory Democracy. And in your research, when you look at Bolivia, Ecuador, Venezuela, Cuba, and then you look at North America, and you talk about participatory, how does it actually rate to the people as far as participating in democracy?
But I have a particular question. In democracy, socialist, like I said, Cuba has a socialist democracy. And one aspect of workers' democracy. And one aspect of that democracy that I understand when you do this trade union movement and work-based democracy. And that works differently from electoral democracy, and you mentioned Congress, and you mentioned all of this. Because every place and in every world we have a workplace issue.
Yeah, I think the Venezuelan political system and the Cuban political system obviously evolved in different contexts. The Cubans, through the context of the Cold War, facing constant threats from the U.S., whereas the Venezuelan Revolution was very much the idea of kicking the doors open to participatory democracy and so on. And I think you can see the two revolutions are really closely intertwined. You can see Venezuela sending Cuba oil, Cuba sending doctors to Venezuela, and so on. I'm wondering if you can comment on what kind of back and forth there is between discussions of the political systems in the respective countries, how the movements are impacting each other, what sort of debate there is around that.
I have listened to different media sources and sometimes trying to read some books here in North America and Europe. How do you think about we can overcome this notion about democracy and revolution that one size fits all? You know?
Yes. Well, I think one way to do it, if I may say so, is not only to buy my book, but help me and Octopus and others to spread this book.
And I do want to say that I was quite disappointed in our own Prime Minister's comment when Chavez passed away. In fact, I was sickened by it, far more than what Obama said, I can tell you that. And
I'm sickened by everything.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm saying, but that, I was just appalled.
I completely agree with you. So I think on that note, according to Ben and the people from Octopus, we sort of have to end this formal part. So we go to the book signing. At the same time, of course, I'm here to answer questions. And before breaking up, I was waiting for the appropriate moment because the Cuban ambassador had not arrived. Now I know the Cuban ambassador is here, so I'll do that. Even though it's not the normal way of doing things, I will now recognize the importance of the diplomatic missions here as co-sponsors, as well as all the other co-sponsors who supported this event. Specifically, I'd like to recognize the participation here, the attendance here of His Excellency Julio Garmendia Peña, who is the ambassador to Cuba, as well as other members of the Cuban embassy staff, Jorge and Kenya, who I know for a long time as well, and others as well. And of course, there's Ana Carolina Rodriguez, who's the Charge d'Affaires of Venezuela. And we know from experience, whether when I was invited to Caracas, whether it's here in Ottawa, whatever, we can always count on Venezuela to come through to help us on these events. And we also have, very happy to have here from the Ecuadorian Embassy, Hilda Cesalema, who is the Minister of the Ecuadorian Embassy. So we have a very good representation from the main ALBA countries, just to show that what is happening in Latin America, this is still going on, and we very much appreciate the participation of the Cuba, Venezuelan, Bolivia, and Ecuadorian embassies in co-sponsoring this event and attending. Thank you very much.
I actually have a very good friend, from Cuba, by the name of Gerardo Hernandez. Some of you probably know him. He's one of the Cuban Five.
Good job, Arnold. I figured we want to have fun. You did a good job.
Iba integrando bandera con valores ancestrales, son radios visionarios. Hoy desdeñas al imperio de la codicia y la insanidad. Ya ves,